So it's 8:15 at night. The rain's let up a little bit. Everybody's gone to roost for the night, but I'm out here throwing some treats to them to eat for tomorrow. And been thinking about something here lately. And it deals with names of bloodlines. So, in showbirds and game fowl, you hear a lot of talk about people saying, well, that's not really so-and-so's bloodline because you didn't get it directly from them. Or even, well, you don't have the real whatever bloodline because he only bred them for 10 years and everything he sold after that wasn't really that. It was this with a little dash of that, and it was a different breeding. By the way, say hello to the newest member of the farm. I don't know what he is for sure. I'm waiting to hear back from a guy. But he's kind of what prompted me to bring this question up in the first place. So, here's the story on that bird. I went to a swap meet this weekend because we are going to try and have a game fowl class at a poultry show coming up this fall here in Minnesota. Something they haven't done before. Judges are all on board. Show secretary's been very helpful. And so I went to this swap, and there was a guy there with a whole crate of game fowl. Walk over and talk to him, and I says, "Where'd you get them?" And he tells me, and it's somebody that I know. It's actually the guy that I bought my 4 young chicks from earlier this year to go with my lonely little Morgan stag. There's 2 of them right there. They're coming along nicely. So since this guy bought them, there's the other 2. He couldn't really remember what they were. And I'm gonna guess that he just kind of bred them as a group. But I said, what the heck, I'll buy them anyway. The price was right, and I figured, you know what, I can at least get them into the right hands rather than having this guy have to haul them home. And the only reason he said he was selling them was because the foxes were getting into everything he had, and he didn't want these birds to get eaten by the foxes, which is understandable. So I come home, I call the guy up that he bought them from, said, "Do you happen to remember selling to this guy?" "Yeah, I do," he says. I said, "Do you happen to remember what you sold him?" And I'm describing him to him, and he goes, "Well, I'm pretty sure the rooster has my pumpkin blood in it, and some blue henny that come from a Mexican friend of mine. And the hens that you got are probably some of my claret blood." So, based on that, I can assume this bird is pumpkin and blue henny. That's only an assumption. He's clearly a blue, so he has a blue in his lineage, but whether it's henny, he's not showing henny feathering, so that part we don't know. So one school of thought is that the minute you raise birds off of somebody else's birds that you purchased, the offspring are your birds because you're selecting for different traits you are pairing up the parents differently than the original breeder may have. And obviously, the birds being sold are not ones they wanted to keep for their program. Second school of thought is they are still that bloodline until you make enough of a visual change to them, or difference in performance or weight or what have you, that they become yours. And a third is the minute you cross another bloodline to it, it is no longer pure for that bloodline. And I subscribe to that thought too. The minute you put in a different bloodline, it is no longer that bloodline. But here's how I look at it. Let's say hang on a second. Let's just say that it's like a car dealership, all right? Now, I dated a gal in college whose family was big into Fords, and her dad was particularly fond of Mustangs. He had one that was of a very limited production. I don't recall the specifications on it or anything like that, so don't ask. But here's how I look at it. A Ford Mustang is a Ford Mustang. They change from year to year, and there's a slight distinction between a Shelby Mustang and your common average Mustang. That being said, is it only a Mustang if you go pick it up from the manufacturer? Is it only a Mustang if you pick it up from a specific manufacturer? Is it no longer a Mustang because the car was put back together out of parts, and part of that car come out of California and part of it come out of Colorado to make a complete car? So that's kind of what I'm getting at here. I make distinctions on the different families, as I call them, of my game chickens. But basically, with the exception of the new ones, everything I have is a Morgan white hackle, or predominantly Morgan blood. And so what I'll say is, okay, this is my Wisconsin family of Morgans. This is my Emory or Illinois family of Morgans. This is the Gull Cross family. And what I'm basically doing is making distinctions within the bloodline. Now, there are distinctly different bloodlines of Morgan. There are some that are almost solid white with white legs. There are the Sid Dowd Morgans. There's the Norm Terry Morgans. Butch Taylor's Morgans. There's a couple others. Bosley Morgans, and they've all got their own distinct stamp to them. But that's no different than, a Mustang or a Charger or a Corvette coming out of a place where they did customization packages. They put their own stamp on it, and that's going back to that old man's Mustang. That's basically what happened there. It was a custom package on a factory Mustang, but it was a factory custom package, if that makes sense. So, in the end, they're all Morgans. And then if you go further back, in the end, all Morgans are white hackles. And I consider a Gull a white hackle also. So, what is pure, I guess, is the point. Now, if I start breeding Doms to Kelsos, I'd consider that my own line, because the Dom pattern is not part and parcel of the lineage of the Kelso. If I breed my white hackle blood into a line of grays and I keep them coming gray color, I don't consider that to be a white hackle anymore, you know? But, what is it then? Well, it's whatever I call it. And that's part of the fun of Game Chickens, to me, is researching all these old bloodlines and histories and names. And, you can find just crazy amounts of history on some of these. And then there's others that you hear the name and you see a picture or two of them, but nobody knows anything about them. There's a bloodline that I'd like to find out more information on, in particular, called a Felix Flathead. And the reason I have such an interest in it is because I have a magazine. From, I forget the year now, it's somewhere between the 20s and the 50s, with a Felix Flathead on the cover, owned by a man who shared the same last name as me, who lived in Iowa. My family's from Nebraska. I would love to hear the history on that bloodline. I would love to find out if I'm related to that old guy somehow. Good luck finding information on it. The only information I've found has been as a footnote on another bloodline, basically. And that just goes to show you too, the names of these bloodlines. They're crazy, and there's tons of interest and backstory to them. Tool Pusher Blue, Wilkinson Typewriter. Everybody that's familiar with GameFile in this day and age knows what a sweater is. They've heard of a radio. You've got the Marsh Butcher. You've got Speeder Grays, Candy Stripers, Gray Dragon Muff, Flary-Eyed Gray. What's some other old ones I've heard of? Hazard Brown Red. I don't know. There's just more than my brain can think of right now. And it's all documented in old magazines. And you can get these magazines, it's a neat little hobby. You can get these magazines on eBay. And people, unfortunately, consider that proof that you're up to illegal activities because there's old advertisements for, sporting implements, if you will, in those magazines, and old reports of derbies in those magazines. Pretty much all of them that they're from decades ago. A lot of the old magazines you buy, those guys are long gone, long dead. So what that has to do with what you're doing with your birds today is beyond me. But the pictures and the histories are interesting, and not just because it's documented, but it ties into the culture and the region and the world history of the time. And then if you're someone who likes putting puzzles together and conspiracies and that kind of thing, get into some of these bloodlines that are hotly debated. Read up on the Murphy fowl, the Murphy white hackle, some people call them. You will see multiple variants, and a lot of these guys wrote under pen names, so there's no way for me to know who is who. But one guy will say, oh, they were bred with this bird and this bird and this bird, and that's what made them. Next guy will say, none of those birds were in the family tree at all. Another guy will say, well, the first guy was half right, but he didn't know the rest of the story because my cousin worked for the man at the time, and this is the real story. So, going with the Morgans, for example. I had a man straight up tell me, and I've seen this time and again, if you have yellow-legged Morgans, they're not real Morgans. Well, read the history on your Morgan white hackle. First of all, read your history on North Britain gamefowl to start off with. They were a three-way cross at least. Okay? And white hackles across the board. yellow legs and white leg birds. Now, let's just suppose that the birds that Morgan started with were all white legged. It is documented fact that he bred in 1/16th blood, I believe, of a hen from a bloodline called a Newbold Ginger. Ginger is the name that they use for what we call red quill in the States. Ginger is what they call it in the UK. And a lot of ginger fowl in the UK actually trace back to Estlin red quills from the Washington, D.C. area. Red quill, for those who are unfamiliar, has green legs. Genetically, green leg is a modified yellow leg. So, even if Morgan's birds were all white legged to start, the minute he put in that ginger blood, it gave him the opportunity to produce yellow-legged birds. And there's actually at least one account I've read where they said that early on he was getting some green-legged birds out of them, but he would always dispose of those as he preferred the light-legged birds. So there's that. Take it for what it's worth. But anyway, it's late. I'm rambling, and I'm sure you guys are, I don't know. I hope you're entertained. I hope it maybe inspires some of you to start reading up on your own bloodlines. Some of them have a really, really rich history. The Marsh Butchers in particular, they were developed by a man whose family continues to breed them, I believe, 6 generations later today. And I'm not talking 6 generations chicken, I'm talking 6 generations of people in that family have bred the Marsh Butcher and the Marsh Speeder Gray, which went into the Butcher. So there's just some food for thought for you. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next video.